family. At the age of 16, I was brought here from California. So I was a dependent living with mom in California along with my brother. And the entire rest of the family, both my mother and father's side, were from Cleveland area. And we were in California as a result of my father having been in the military for some years, stationed in California. So we grew up there in the Bay Area, in and near Oakland, California, until the age of 16, moved to the Cleveland area, graduated from high school here in Cleveland, in the Cleveland area, and went to college a couple of years in Atlanta, Georgia, and ran out of money, came back, went to Cleveland State, and got a bachelor's and master's degree. And after getting a master's degree, took a job in Miami, Florida with Miami-Dade County government. Worked there for a year and got a call out of the blue to come back here and be a special assistant to the CEO of Cleveland Schools. They had just switched from a superintendent under an elected board in Cleveland to a CEO under a board of education that was appointed by the mayor. So that was the first CEO, and I worked as her special assistant. And after that, worked for Cuyahoga County Commissioners, and after working there for 6 years, managed an economic development, housing development program for the county for about a year, and then decided to run for mayor of East Cleveland.
Wow. Wow, you have really quite a story. The dots are connected. So you are married, single, divorced, or widowed?
Married. Happily married, proud dad of 3 beautiful girls, Kendall, Cameron, and Courtney.
Ah, there you go.
And
Your
right
current
now,
address?
as we speak, I have 2 5-year-old daughters and 1 3-year-old daughter.
Okay.
And that's because it's the funny time of year. My first 2 daughters are 11 months apart, so there's 1 month every year that they're the same age. So yesterday was the birthday of the middle child, so now I have 2 5-year-olds and 1 3-year-old.
How about that?
Yep. And address on Newberry Drive here in East Cleveland.
And how long have you resided there?
11 years.
Previous to this, what was your address and how long were you there?
That's a good question. Prior to this, I lived in Cleveland. And prior to that, I lived in Miami, Florida.
Okay, you did talk about your education, but I just want to zero in on high school. Where did you attend high school?
Cleveland Heights High School.
Okay. And what are your religious affiliations?
I'm a Baptist. I belong to Antioch Baptist Church in Cleveland.
Thank you. And let's talk a little bit about your parents. What is your mother's name?
Stephanie.
Full name?
Stephanie Helm.
Home?
Helm.
Helm, H-E-L-M. All right. And what is her date of birth?
I don't know.
Where was she born?
Cleveland.
All right. And your dad?
Gary Norton.
And what was his date of birth?
Don't know.
Okay. And where was his birthplace?
Cleveland.
All right. Where do they reside now?
Cleveland for dad and Cleveland Heights mom.
Where did they attend school?
Glenville.
Ah, both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where they met?
I believe so.
Okay. What does your mom do for a night?
She works for a hospital sanitary specialty company.
And your dad?
Home health care.
Oh, so there's some similarity in that regard. Now you said home health care. Does he have like hands-on experience, or is he more an administrator of a company?
He services and operates breathing apparati in people's homes.
Okay. Thank you for that. Tell me about your brother. You mentioned your brother. Do you have any other siblings?
I have a sister, brother and a sister. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Your brother, how was it when you were coming up? What's the age difference?
1 year.
1 year.
Yep.
And how about your sister?
12 years.
12 years.
Yep.
And where do you fall in that?
I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest.
Yep.
Okay. Now, you did earlier tell me the names of your children, but I just want to go back and capture that. Their names are?
Kendall,
Kendall,
Cameron, and Courtney.
Cameron,
Mm-hmm.
with a C or
Mm-hmm.
a
C.
Mhm.
And Courtney with a C.
And where were they born?
They were born here, Cleveland,
Okay.
at Marymount Hospital, when they used to deliver babies.
Ah.
So we kept them busy 3 summers in a row.
To say the least.
Yep.
Okay. And their birth dates are?
August 20th, 2008, and 2006, and then July 25th, 2007. So both both Kendall and Courtney, the oldest and the youngest, have the same birthday, 2 years apart, and then Cameron's right in the middle.
How about that? Okay. Thank you for that. Now, I'd like for you to spend a little time telling me about yourself and the history of your family that you didn't mention earlier. So, how was it like growing up in your household?
Let's see. In my household, we lived in the Bay Area, so it was not as cold in the winter growing up in the household. It was a good existence. Parents were married until the age of 6. Mom and Dad divorced. Dad was there, but divorced from Mom in the Bay Area in California for a couple of years. But then for business reasons, he moved back to Cleveland. So it was just me, Mom, and brother. And we lived there, raised by a single mom in the Bay Area. It was an existence that was good. It was in the 1980s. And we went to elementary school, went to middle school, went to high school, played sports, active in sports. In high school, active in the marching band. And it was, Mom worked hard. And in the Bay Area, the commutes were very long, so an hour to work sometimes each way. And, but we maintained a reasonable family existence there.
Everyone did what they had to do?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And so I was a normal kid, and then at the age of 16, moved here to the Cleveland area, where I lived with Dad and stepmom. So it was then a 2-parent household, and did a little better in high school than I had before, but I didn't know many people, so that helped me study a little bit more. And became a person who was new in the school, new to the area, and things like that. So it was good upbringing, and like many teenagers, moved with Dad at the right time.
Now, when you were in the Bay Area, was it just you and your mom and your siblings, or did you have other family members who lived in?
No other real family, no real biological family in the area.
Okay.
Mom, she would see a person for a number of years and another person for a number of years, so their families became our extended family. But there is no one really who, to this day, I communicate with who was part of that extended family at the time. The family is here in the Cleveland area for the most part. My brother has gone to D.C. He lives in Washington now. My sister is still in the Cleveland area.
Okay. Now, can you think back to your earliest memories of East Cleveland what life was like then.
My earliest memories of East Cleveland are in the 1980s because that's when I moved here, moved to the area. And East Cleveland in the 1980s was going through a transition. It was going through some very difficult times. In urban America, the 1980s was when crack cocaine took hold. The 1980s was when society changed in many ways. The 1980s, I believe, was when East Cleveland changed in major ways. And you know, there was some flight of folks during that time. There was an influx of people during that time. There were social changes. Again, crack cocaine, it ravaged communities, and I think it ravaged East Cleveland. And, but there were still very, very good, strong families throughout that time. But it's amazing what a few individuals who are strung out on drugs, and not only that, but individuals who become drug dealers and prey on people, did to our community, did to our streets. And in some cases, in many cities, East Cleveland no exception, there were open-air drug markets, there was violence, there was intimidation, there were social institutions in many cases that eroded over the years as a result of that type of activity.
Okay. And how did that activity, the goings on at that time, affect you personally? And what part of East Cleveland were you living in at that time?
It affects me today. And in high school, remember, I went to Heights High School, so I didn't live in East Cleveland. But I lived on Coventry, which was about 6 houses away from East Cleveland. So I lived very close. It affects me to this day, quite frankly. As mayor, we have to deal with houses that are vacant and abandoned and have been vacant and abandoned for 15 years, in part because families who did not want to be around the street culture that came to East Cleveland as a result of that drug trade, they didn't want to be around, so they left. And those families were not replaced in some cases. So the legacy of that era in the 1980s and 1990s is felt today. So I'm still feeling it today, still reeling from it today, and still it's one of our biggest challenges, the remaining impact of those things.
Okay. We've talked about some negative things that were going on at East Cleveland, indicative of the times. You also talked about the fact that there were some strong families, which, you know, is the reason why some people are still standing and surviving. But what is your fondest memory of East Cleveland, or fondest memories?
Being in the park. Very good memories of being in the park, very good memories of coming to friends' houses, families' houses. My grandmother lives in a beautiful house in Forest Hill. I always came to her. In fact, the house that my wife and I now own, we bought from my other grandmother. So my grandmother and grandfather lived in the house where I now live. We bought it while my grandmother was still living, and my other grandmother lives up the street. So, so I have good memories of East Cleveland as a kid, wonderful neighbors, strong families, stable neighborhood, and quite frankly, visiting my grandmothers and being around this area is one of the main reasons why my wife and I bought our house to raise our family in the area where we bought it. So fond memories are why I'm here.
Let's talk a little bit about your grandmothers. Where were they from?
One grandmother was on my father's side. She was from Rome, Georgia. The grandfather on that side is from Houma, Louisiana. And on my mother's side, grandma's from Kentucky.
Okay. Their names, your father's grandmother's name, or your grandmother?
Dorothy Norton.
Okay.
And Harvey Norton is grandfather, and he was a business owner, and she was a nurse.
What kind of business did he?
Scotty's Mid-City Lounge on Cedar.
Ah.
And Harvey's Land of Hi-Fi, which was a record store in the Wade Park area. And every now and then they own different businesses, but those are two of the ones that stick out. So he was in the music business, record business. He was in the spirits business, number of business, and my grandmother was a nurse.
Okay. Mayor Norton, how has racism impacted you personally, and how has it impacted the city of East Cleveland?
I think racism has impacted me personally. Just, you get called this name, that name, the other name, which is troubling, but you learn how to deal with that. It has probably impacted me because it impacted generations that came before me. If the generations that came before me were able to live anywhere they wanted to live and to go to school anywhere they wanted to go to school and to do anything they wanted to do and to be forced by whatever employer they worked with, be paid a wage that was comparable to people in other races or be given promotional opportunities, there's no telling where my life would have taken me because of what their lives could have taken them. It's also impacted me perhaps in a positive way. I know through history, through them as people, and through what I read and study, that they fought fights so that people like me could live where we want to live, that we'd have the right to vote, that we'd have the right to go to school, that we'd have the right to be treated just as well as anyone else or badly as anyone else under the law, and it's illegal to discriminate. I know that because they fought those fights, I live a better life. And I know that they fought those fights not knowing that someday I would come along and reap the benefits. And when I say that racism might have impacted me in a positive way, it lets me know that we have to fight for the generations that will come after us, even though we may never meet them, we may never know them, that there are worthy causes to take up so somebody else doesn't have to fight that fight in the future. And I admire them, really, because I don't have to face water cannons or pit bulls or vicious mobs and be beaten because of them. And they faced all of that to help me. So part of the challenge is defining today in a society that's not defined as much by color, which you can and can't do, but defined more by economic status and geographic area and where you live, how your quality of life is going to be today and in the future. How do I fight the fight so the next generation won't have to?
Mayor Norton, earlier you talked about the changes or what East Cleveland was going through during the 80s. In terms of inequality, not just the racism, which of course is related to inequality, but how specifically can you pinpoint anything as it related to the changing demographics that were around you at that time? In terms of the white flight. I mean, in terms
I think a
of
lot of the
looking
white flight occurred before that 1980s period. It may have accelerated a bit or wrapped up during that period, but I think that a lot of it occurred during the 1970s and into the 1980s.
Okay.
But I think that with the drug trade that came about at that time, it really, really hurt. So there was not only race flight, because before that I believe there was race-based flight, but in the 80s, late 80s, there was probably class-based flight.
Okay.
People who could afford to take their family somewhere different, in many cases did.
Okay, and how did that impact you personally at the time?
At the time, it didn't really impact me, but I have to deal with it today as mayor.
Yes.
So while I was not impacted by it when it happened, I have to deal with the lasting impact of it today. Half of the houses vacant and abandoned.
Would that have anything to do with the area of East Cleveland in which you reside?
In some cases, yes. My neighborhood is very, very stable. It's the highest home ownership neighborhood in East Cleveland. There are single-family homes. There are no multi-family apartment buildings. There are no multi-family homes. There are no two-family, no three-family homes. And people are home owners for the most part and we cut our grass, we rake our leaves, we keep our houses halfway presentable and things like that. That is a characteristic of homeowners, and we just have a neighborhood full of them. So my neighborhood's relatively stable.
Can you recollect a memory or instance when the community fought for something? This should be pretty easy for you.
Huron Hospital, the Cleveland Clinic, they decided to close Huron Hospital. And we came together and we fought to keep it open. We were unsuccessful. and the hospital was bound and determined to close the hospital system rather, was determined to close the hospital. And we fought and fought and fought and fought and fought. And in the end, it was the institution, the Cleveland Clinic, that decided to close that hospital based on its business model, based on its business practices, based on its needs, delivering health care, and that's what they decided to do. So they closed that hospital, but we really came together to fight that closure. And it ended where they built an outpatient clinic in the city, and they are giving several $million to the city to compensate for loss of tax revenue and things like that. And they've done some demolition of vacant abandoned structures also to compensate the city.
What is your vision for a future East Cleveland? What would it look like? Tell me about some major issues that need addressing in order to better East Cleveland.
Sure. Certainly, I think that the new East Cleveland will be smaller than the old East Cleveland. We had 40,000 people here in the 1970s. We've got about 20,000 now. I don't think that the population is going to double over the next 3 years. When you have only half of the people living in a place that used to, that means that you're at about 50% occupancy rate or 50% vacancy rate. If the population is not coming back, then we don't need as many places to live. Some of the places are dilapidated, some of the places are blighted, which is why we've engaged in strategic demolition of vacant and abandoned houses, both to get rid of blight and to help neighbors on the street improve the appearance of their street. And it's not easy living on a street where people keep moving out and
because of the emergency vehicle, could you back up just a little, and I think we're probably ready to wrap this up.
yeah,
But
you just want me to answer the question again? I'll answer it again.
Yes, if you would please.
Yeah. So the new East Cleveland, what does it look like?
Yes, so tell me what your, okay.
Yeah. One of the good things about being next to the fire station and police.
Absolutely. Our city's working.
Yeah. Big fire.
Yeah. God bless them.
All right. That might have emptied us out.
You might have
That might have emptied us out. It might be one more siren, but it sounded like 3 to me. So,
You're right about that.
yeah.
Okay, as soon as it gets a little bit
Right.
further. Okay. Now, what is your vision for a future East Cleveland? And I would love for you to tell me about the major issues that you feel need to be addressed in order to better East Cleveland.
Sure. When a city in 1970s was 40,000, which East Cleveland was, it was 40,000 people in 1970s. Today it's half of that. It's about 20,000 people, give or take. We have, strictly by the numbers, a place that's built for 40,000 people to live, but only 20,000 live in it. That's about a 50% vacancy rate, 50% occupancy rate, whichever way you decide to phrase it. I don't believe that this population is going to double in 5 years. So the question becomes, do you need spaces for 40,000 people to live when only 20,000 people are going to live here? The answer, in my opinion, is no, you don't need that. We have an oversupply of housing. And in order to meet the needs of the population and get rid of hazardous vacant and abandoned spaces, we need to get rid of some of our housing, which is why we've engaged in strategic demolition. Some of the most hazardous vacant and abandoned houses we've demolished. We've demolished over 200 vacant and abandoned houses in the past year and a half, and we're moving now to some of the large vacant and abandoned apartment buildings. We've gotten tremendous assistance from the county government and the federal government, and some from the state, to do that, because they recognize that one of the fallouts of the foreclosure crisis and the banking crisis of 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010 is that cities are left with these hulking structures that are absolute nuisances. So we're getting rid of those for a lot of reasons. One, the population is probably not coming back. Two, vacant and abandoned houses and buildings, there is a greater likelihood that they will catch on fire there's a greater likelihood that there will be some sort of crime committed in them. There was a greater likelihood that someone will be injured in a vacant and abandoned house. We've all heard stories about drug houses. We've all heard stories about criminal enterprises, storage and distribution. And we've heard, unfortunately, some stories about people being abducted and harmed in vacant and abandoned structures. So we want to get rid of them. It allows our police and fire spend an inordinate amount of their time in these vacant and abandoned structures responding to calls. We want to get rid of the places that are vacant so our police and fire can spend time paying attention to where people live. So we want to make it a safer community by getting rid of those things as well. In addition, by getting rid of structures, we want to create larger tracts of land for new development. We believe that with our proximity to University Circle, the fastest growing job center in the state of Ohio, that it is in some cases landlocked. There are people who want to live and or have a business at University Circle who can't get in there either because they can't find the configuration they need or they can't afford the configuration they need. And we offer an outlet to accommodate the excess demand right outside the borders of University Circle. I say half a block for half the price. We are very, very competitive. And based on that strategy, the demolition in strategic areas, the marketing as an outlet for the excess demand at University Circle, we've attracted the University's Circle East townhouses that were newly built in East Cleveland at Euclid and Lakeview, and we're going to expand that. We've also cleaned up an old factory site there for new development, new business, and we believe we've got a tenant that's coming there, and a large tenant, a corporate headquarters, so that's a good thing. So it'll bring jobs and economic activity. So we're trying to get rid of things that people probably no longer want, some outdated houses, outdated buildings, and allow people to build things that are more suitable for the 21st century. In addition to that, for those who want to preserve some of the finest housing stock in Northeast Ohio, we have those opportunities for someone who wants to give tender love and care to an older home that they want to restore, or if not restore it to its former glory, at least make it livable for them and their family at a very, very low price. So we can accommodate a lot of people. We can accommodate a lot of things in a very small space.
Thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I thank you so very much for providing the opportunity for us. We know that your comments are going to be very, very useful in terms of our voicing and action project, in terms of moving the city forward, helping to move the city forward. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Turn that off. What did it get to?
Okay, so we'll probably come back another day and answer. I probably got almost all the questions.
You got all the questions. In terms of the ambient noise, just on the side.
I don't know much about your camera and your equipment, but this will probably, you probably won't get that much of that.
Okay.
Just from my experience with these types
You've
of things,
had more experience
you
than
probably
I
won't.
have,
You probably
so
won't get much of that at all. Yeah.
Okay. Well, here we go. Yes, right there.
Okay, so I will de-mic if that's.
Yes,
Okay, great.
absolutely.